Now let's start. Okay, so as I was saying, I'm Zeal. I'm here to talk about fungi. I love fungi and I would love to share my love with it with you guys. Um, but uh, this is not school, so there's going to be a lot of information in this lecture. I expanded it and made it even more extensive. So there's going to be a lot of stuff in here. It's not something that you need to memorize. It's more for introductory purposes. And in fact, I don't have it all memorized. So it's more for kind of introducing people to the different aspects of mycology and for different things to be thinking about. And then you can use any of the information in here. You can use any of the sources in this lecture if you get interested in this topic and you'd like to get out into the field and look at mushrooms. And also, because it's so long, I was practicing and kind of getting tired doing it, so I decided to kind of add a break to this lecture. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So, first of all, I just wanted to introduce the topic of fungi themselves because I think, when people are in school and they're taking biology, you definitely learn about plants, right? So you learn about photosynthesis, you learn about plant reproduction, and how important plants are to the ecosystem. But I feel like we don't really talk as much about fungi. Maybe you learn that they reproduce by spores, but that's about it. However, they actually are extremely important to life on the planet and very, very interesting, at least to me. So I wanted to kind of give a rundown and a little introduction here. So we can find fungi pretty much everywhere. They do live in the oceans. They do live in deserts, even though they're associated with moisture and humidity. And they do live inside of us. Obviously, we can get fungi growing on us. Nobody really wants that, to get a fungal infection. But actually, there are, if people have heard of the gut microbiome, fungi are also part of that biome. So they are important to our gut and to helping us to digest things. Fungi are interesting for their ability to eat pretty much anything, and we'll be talking more about that as we go on. Only about 10% of fungi are making fruiting bodies, mushrooms. So that means that there's tons and tons and tons of fungi out there which we are typically not seeing, or at the very least are not what people usually think of as fungi, making the mushrooms. They can be some of the smallest organisms, so they can be unicellular, a single cell, and they can also be some of the largest organisms on the planet. And so Taz knows about this because I have shared this with her before, but in Oregon, in the Malheur National Forest, lives one of the largest organisms on the planet. It's a colony of honey mushrooms. They are edible. And so how exactly this is all one organism is something we're going to talk about as we go forward. It's not a giant mushroom. It's not a single huge mushroom, but it covers, let me see here, it covers 2,384 acres or 10 square kilometers. And it is over 2,400 years old. So very old and very huge organism. There are about 150,000 species of fungi that we have described, but scientists estimate that there's probably millions. And they're relatively understudied. And the more you look into mycology, the more you're going to find people saying things like, this mushroom used to be classed in this family, but now it's here. We used to think these were related, but now we know they're not. And a lot of these changes are very recent because the field is kind of popping off and getting more and more popular, and more discoveries are being made every day. And I personally like fungi because they're very elusive and kind of slippery. They're a little hard to pin down. They're not particularly domesticated. So I just find them very cool. Okay, next. So I thought it would be good to kind of differentiate fungi from other forms of life. So they are eukaryotic. They have a membrane around the nucleus. They're heterotrophic as opposed to autotrophic. And what that means is that they need to eat. They cannot simply make their own energy like how plants can do through photosynthesis. So they need to eat something, other organic life forms, or maybe they are going to eat from the soil. And so this quote here says that fungi are characterized by not the way that they reproduce, but how they feed. So how do they feed? They feed by excreting enzymes. So they kind of put out like a chemical and they break things down so that they can eat them. It's sort of like having a stomach outside, I guess. And so they are particularly good at this compared to most plants, for instance. So they're very good at absorbing carbon and nitrogen. Their cell walls are made of chitin, with some rare exceptions. And so chitin is the same thing that insects, insect exoskeletons are made of. Many fungi have no natural end to their growth. So they can just keep on growing and growing and growing, potentially forever. And that's part of one of the reasons they can be so, they can live for so long. And we'll be seeing exactly how that works later on. So here's a little picture of the kind of evolutionary tree. So we can see that they branched off from animals. They are more closely related to animals than they are to plants. This is a very ancient type of fungi which still had a flagella, so like they could kind of swim around. That was lost along the way. This group here is like our bread molds. You know, you don't really want that growing out of your food. These live dormant inside of other creatures, particularly plants. And so these are the ones we're going to be seeing the most often, making fruiting bodies, seeing them out in the woods. Now, this isn't necessarily something that you need to memorize, but these are terms that come up the more you get into fungi. So the Ascomycota produce spores inside in sacs, and the Basidiomycota, I'm not great at pronouncing things, Basidiomycota, what's up? Somebody's quacking at me. What's happening? So we're back. There was some kind of problem with Discord, but it appears that the problem is now done. So, I was showing people the guys here. So everything else I kind of said out loud, but just, again, the pictures here showing the different stages. And so this is the Ascomycota, the sac fungi, which produce their spores internally. And then this is the Basidiomycota, which produces spores externally. All right. Whew. I gotta get a sip of water or something. Okay. So, fungi evolutionary history. A lot of this is just, I had a lot of fun researching and wanted to look into more because it's believed that fungi are pretty important to the evolution of life on Earth. However, they're a little bit hard to study in the fossil record because, they don't have bones. They don't have like hardwood. So there just aren't that many fossils of them. But they may have been around for billions of years. And almost certainly, like other forms of life, they probably began in water in the oceans. But they lost that flagella, which allowed them to kind of swim around a long time ago, or most of them did. There's only a handful left, which still have flagella. So some scientists think that the ancient ancestor was a parasite on algae, because there's some evidence that these really early fungi had the ability to digest biological matter. So they must have been eating something. And then this study here talked about how fungi moved onto land and the possibility of fungi kind of facilitating the move onto land of life. So one is the green scenario, coevolution with plants. As we're going to see going forward, there is a huge symbiotic relationship between plants and fungi that goes extremely deep, so it does make sense. They also proposed a potential white scenario in which ice kind of allowed the move, which sort of makes sense if you think about ice kind of going from water onto land. And then the brown scenario is coevolution with soil. And then this kind of ties into fungal weathering, which is something which really interests me. So weathering is a term in geology, and it refers to how minerals and rock material is broken down. So how does, for instance, limestone get broken down, or like how does limestone form? It's from other rocks which have been broken down over time, right? So things like that. Water weathers rock, etc. And so fungi play a role in weathering as well. And this study here from Gan et al. Found that found very ancient, is about 2.4 billion year old fossils in South China, and they found these filaments going through rock, right? So this is so old that it's really hard to say exactly what these are, but genetic studies seem to say some ancient ancestor perhaps of fungi. And it is particularly interesting because just thinking about mineral richness being very important in the evolution of life. So like there needs to be minerals in the water, in the soil. And so perhaps ancient ancestors of fungi kind of facilitated that and caused greater mineral richness by eating rock, kind of crawling through rock, boring it down and weathering it. Okay. So I had to talk about prototaxites because I love prototaxites and I think it's very cool. These guys are fossils which are found. There is still some debate whether or not this was a fungi, but I think the general scientific consensus is that it was. And so these are from 350 to 420 million years ago, from the late Silurian to late Devonian periods. These fossils are found. And it's thought that so this is before plants evolved to be tall. So just imagining this landscape in this ancient time where it was just these giant fungi standing up. They could be 24 feet high, which is 7 meters tall, and then 3 feet wide, or about a meter. So quite big, and they probably released spores from the top of them, and it's just cool to me to imagine a landscape just dominated by these guys. They think they were pretty common. And so why did they stop? Why did these giant fungi stop existing? Well, there's some evidence of them being eaten through by bugs. And eventually, probably it just became less evolutionarily advantageous for them to be huge like this. And so over time, fungi have moved from no longer making these huge fruiting bodies to making smaller and smaller ones. It seems to work just as well for them, so. Okay. I kind of did this more for my own benefit, just to kind of go over some of the different types of fungi which are not the traditional mushrooms. But we got our molds, yeasts. Yeasts are unicellular, which I thought was kind of interesting. Obviously, nobody wants a yeast infection, but they're also useful because we use them for fermentation and bread making, stuff like that. Rusts and smuts are bad for plants. They are pathogens. Smuts can do a lot of harm to crops, but they also can be edible, so we can at least get something out of them. And then mushrooms. So I was kind of interested in looking into like sexual reproduction of fungi. Most of them are both asexual, as in can reproduce just by themselves, and also kind of prefer to mate with a different organism because of the benefit of genetic diversity. And it was really cool looking into this because most mushrooms have many different sexes. So there are occasionally ones that only have 2, but most of them have 4, 6, 8, or up to thousands. I have heard of one that had 17,000 different sexes. And so they're considered to be more like mating pairs. So basically, there isn't just one match for any given mushroom. It has to do with genetic compatibility. So they basically want to mate with another of their kind, which has like opposite genetic sequence of the sexual genes, reproductive genes, I should say. So they're looking for something which is different to themselves. And this is something fun I found while looking into this. They do not have sexually transmitted diseases, but mushrooms which are not compatible for mating can kind of team up and work together. So they can sort of join and become almost one organism together if they're compatible in that other way. And that form of joining together can transmit diseases. So they have like platonic STDs or platonically transmitted diseases, which I thought was funny. Okay, so mycology as a field of study. Three main branches here: pathology, which is preventing fungi from causing problems to crops, as we've talked about, messing with livestock or pets, and obviously we don't want them infecting us. Nobody wants a yeast infection or anything like that. And then, or even rotting your house or something. You know, they do all sorts of stuff. And then field, so this is mostly what I do, going out in the field and looking at them and classifying them and having fun doing that. And then applied is finding uses for them. So culinary, medicinal, environmental, and industrial. I'm going to go into that a little bit more, but as far as industrial goes, I find it cool that fungi can be used to make dyes. Okay, so fungi as food. So my estimation is that about, and I have looked at different research studies which seem to reflect this, about 80% are inedible. So, I mean, they could be bad for you because you just can't digest them, but they're not technically poisonous and you just don't want to eat them. Then about 10% are poisonous, but really most of those are not going to kill you. They're just going to give you an upset stomach and not work for you. And then about 2% are deadly or dangerous, and they could really mess with you. They could really fuck you up. And so comparing that to plants, so there's an amateur mycologist. I say amateur just because he doesn't have formal training, but he's kind of world-renowned. Mycologist named Alan Rockefeller. He says that plants are actually way more likely to be poisonous because they're trying to fight off herbivores, which want to eat them. Fungi don't necessarily do that. They don't want their mycelium, which we'll be talking about going forward, they don't want their mycelium to be eaten. But as far as their fruiting bodies, they kind of don't mind it so much because, we'll talk about that as we go forward. But they don't have as much, to anthropomorphize a little, evolutionary incentive to be poisonous. So there actually are not that many poisonous mushrooms, but you should still be careful, basically. So then about 10% of mushrooms that you'll find are edible, and only about 5% of those are actually tasty. I have eaten some that were not tasty. And then 2% are choice, and those are the ones that the foragers are like really going crazy for and really want. Their nutrition varies by species and also can reflect their environments. They kind of soak things up like a sponge. So if they're in a very rich soil, they're going to be more rich themselves. But they can be a very good source of non-animal protein, iron, vitamins, and minerals. And I am recently seeing mycelium used as a meat replacement. I'm seeing that being sold in stores. It's probably going to be more and more important moving forward because it's high in protein. If you don't know what mycelium is, we will be talking about that, so don't worry. Okay, so fungi can also be used as pest control, which I find, again, very cool. We can see this picture here is of a cordyceps fungi. And so primarily they can be used to get rid of troublesome insects from your home or from crops. And so there's about 1,000 species which are known and described which target insects. And these could be targeting all insects, or they could go after very specific ones, including like the potato bug, which is a huge problem with crops. And cordyceps also have potential medicinal benefits, so that's another plus for using them. They look scary, and they're the inspiration for the Last of Us games. because they like go into things' brains and like control them. But I wouldn't really worry about them doing that to humans. They do it to insects. Okay, medicine. So, as somebody interested in fungi and in foraging, in nature in general, I tend to be cautious about quote unquote natural medicine because I think some people really go crazy with this stuff or they become extremely distrustful of mainstream medicine or like quote unquote non-natural medicine. I don't really think that there's a reason to make that divide in the first place, really, because a lot of our medicines are derived from nature. In fact, we are living in nature, so it makes sense. Many, not a huge, not all, but about a fifth of antibiotics are fungi derived, so, penicillin, right? And so they have general health benefits, a lot of the edible fungi. So, a lot of the ones that you can forage are also medicinal, but if you just eat them or, turn them into a tea or powder, they're going to have general benefits for you. So it's one of those things that's like, it would be good for you if you did it all the time, but it's not some kind of cure-all, basically. So immune support, they can give you some energy. This particular area is very exciting, boosting cognitive function, improving neuroplasticity, and then having anti-inflammatory effects. So then here is where it's important to make a distinction. High dosage levels, right? So not just eating a mushroom one time, but a probably scientifically derived high-level dosage of compounds found in different mushrooms could be used for the treatment of different conditions. There is research on this. So this would be more just being helpful, right? Providing antioxidants. And obviously you can get antioxidants elsewhere for the treatment of cardiovascular disease. Alzheimer's, certainly not a cure, but there's certain fungi, and there's one in particular that we're going to be talking about today, which is very helpful for brain health in general. So it can increase nerve growth factor, brain-derived neurotropic factor, and ergothioneine. I'm not great at pronouncing these things, but basically what that means in practice is that this particular fungi is really good for improving brain health and increasing connections between brain cells and actually getting your brain to produce more brain cells. So that is actually very important, good for a variety of cognitive conditions, including Alzheimer's. So wouldn't cure it, but could help. And probably the most promising area for fungal medicine is cancer. I was kind of cautious about this in the past because I heard people saying, turkey tail cured my mom's cancer, and I tend to be skeptical hearing things like that. But research is finding that multiple different fungi species at high-level dosages can even get rid of cancer, shrink tumors, kill tumor cells. So that's very exciting. This is research from the National Cancer Institute. It's a compilation of research which they have put together for us. Psychedelics, I wanted to mention because it's kind of weird to not mention them at all. A lot of people interested in fungi are interested because of psychedelics. I'm not, that's not really my main interest area, but there is some evidence of psychedelics being useful for mental health conditions. I would not think of it as a cure, though. I would be cautious about it, but it's still an interesting area where there's lots of research being done. Okay. I was very excited to talk about mycoremediation. So this is the environmental usage of fungi. So remediation is something that can be done with things other than mushrooms. Bacteria can be used to do this as well. But it's basically trying to address environmental toxins and pollution using biological life forms. So because of the way that mushrooms eat, they can be used to break down a lot of different things. here we have, this was a study I believe done in Mexico City, where they found that the oyster mushrooms, you can see the picture of them here, this is what they look like, or one species of oyster anyway, were used to break down diapers, cigarette butts, and plastic. And then apparently they were able to turn that into food as well, that the mushrooms who ate that stuff were actually edible. Sounds kind of crazy to me, but apparently. And here, I'm very excited to hear all of this stuff. I don't even know what this one is, but fungi can also remediate really dangerous material like pesticides, herbicides, antibiotics, heavy metals. And this here, harmful algae blooms, is a serious environmental issue that I think a lot of people don't know about. It's caused by fertilizer runoff from like farms. And so fungi could actually also be used to address that. So that's really good news to hear. And even more exciting to me, we have their ability to address radiation and oil spills. So a lot of the most dangerous issues we have going on today, we can use fungi to help address. And I think more and more work should be done in this area. Okay, so now we're actually going to start talking about their morphology and how to identify them. Again, this is not something you need to memorize, but it's just to get you introduced to these ideas. So, unfortunately, we do need to talk about taxonomy. If you can remember back to, elementary or middle school biology, this is where they talk about, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species stuff. It is important because this is how scientists talk about how life forms are related to each other. And that's helpful for really understanding them and their adaptations to things. Also, scientific names are important. Now, I'm not great at memorizing them. I use common names, but the reason that scientific names are important is that common names are not specific. They can get very confusing. The same name could be used for completely unrelated species. So a scientific name is going to tell you for sure the exact species we are dealing with. So just talking a little bit about these terms here, I might not be using them going forward, but I'm definitely going to be kind of referring to some of these concepts. So a monophyletic group is basically all descendants of a common ancestor. So there's nothing left out. It is every single descendant of a common ancestor all grouped into one, right? Paraphyletic would be referring to the same type of thing, but some species are left out. So you're sort of focusing in on a specific area. And then polyphyletic is unrelated, but they're grouped together for some other reason, basically. So it's just getting you thinking about how are things related, how does scientific classification work. Again, you don't need to feel like you need to memorize all this. This is just for kind of introducing the topic. Okay, so now we're actually looking at the life cycle of a fruiting mushroom. So not all fungi are going to do this exact same way, but this is the general way that mushrooms reproduce. In fact, the mushroom itself is the reproductive organ. So it's only one part of the entire organism. And that's why you only see them at certain times, because that's when they're reproducing. So we have the mushroom coming up here. It's letting go of its spores. The spores are landing, and if they have the right substrate, they are able to grow. They will mate under the ground with each other. I feel like they also probably could even join back with the original organism. So like the child kind of going back to the original mycelial network. I think that probably happens a lot. And they kind of all just get busy down here in the dirt, digging, eating. And then when they're ready to reproduce again, the right conditions arise, they will grow another mushroom. So that's generally how it goes. I just included this picture so you can kind of get an idea of what is going on with those. So these are called hyphae, and when they join together, they're called mycelium. So this is what a hyphae looks like up close. They can just, as I said earlier, just keep growing and growing and growing forever. So it's just this huge network that we don't even see that's going on underground. And you can see they've got all the parts of the cell in there. We don't really need to talk about all that. I just included it as a picture so you can kind of get an idea. Okay, but over here, over here we do need to talk, don't do that. Over here we do need to talk about the different terms that are used here. And unfortunately, because the scientists like to mess with us, there are like multiple different words used for each of these parts. It's difficult to memorize, I understand. It can get confusing because look, I mean, here we've got stalk and it's also called stipe. I would just call it stalk. Gills, I just call them gills. Margin here. I've never called the cap the pileus either. And the patches here at the top, but these terms are often interchangeable and used. I mean, I've even seen a third term thrown in. So we need to talk about what this veil is, okay? So this is a very important identifying feature of fungi because when you start to learn about a mushroom and you start to look up a description of a particular species, usually it's going to be these very short, clipped words. They're going to say things like, they have a universal, veil. They've got a partial veil that fades with age. Well, what does that mean, right? So you need to know what these things are to even be able to understand the descriptions that scientists write of mushrooms. So basically, the veil is kind of like a protective, like skin, sort of. You can kind of see what it looks like here. That if we go back and look at the baby mushroom, right, it's kind of covering what's going on down here, right? It's trying to be modest. It's not ready to open up yet, right? So then as it grows, it can tear. So we can see here at the bottom, the vulva, the remaining universal veil, and then at the top, after the stalk grows, there's a ring, or they also call it an annulus, left at the top. We're going to be seeing pictures of mushrooms going forward that will have examples of how this can look. But it's just important to understand these terms because whether or not a mushroom has these things is an important identifying feature. So again, I know all the different terms get confusing, but just kind of getting an introduction to the different identifying features. Okay, so this is what mycelium looks like. If you go into any decent woods with any good amount of biodiversity and health, and you start turning over logs, especially any log that has been there for more than a couple months, you're going to see mycelium. It might not be this extensive, but you're going to see these little stringy white things. What is that? It is fungal activity. It is the fungi that, that's where they mostly live, right? This was just something I kind of wanted to do for myself to kind of look into how do they actually release their spores? So they've got a variety of different methods. They could kind of actively do it themselves through these different methods using surface tension, dehydration, or hydrostatic pressure. They could also release spores from something else kind of doing it for them, like wind, water, or something hitting them, or in animals, particularly insects. So insects love fungi, crawl around on them, and help them move their spores. So if you remember, I mentioned earlier, they often don't really mind having their fruiting body eaten. Well, it's because usually that's actually helping them spread their spores. So kind of the same thing with some fruits, right? And then they're going to release their spores depending on how mature they are, the environmental conditions, particularly humidity, and then potential physical disturbance. Okay, so if you're going to commit anything to memory as an introduction to fungi, morphology, and identification, I would be trying to remember this. So the underside of the mushroom is definitely more helpful for memorizing, for learning how to identify than the top. The bottom tends to be more distinct and to have these very key identifying features. So we've got teeth. I don't tend to see teeth very often on the underside, but they could show up. We've got pores. We'll be seeing pictures of all of these things, by the way, as we go forward, so you'll see what they actually look like on a mushroom. And there's sometimes you see other terminology like maze, but usually it's like a variation on pores, right? So, and then we have ridges and gills. So these are similar, and I would say gills are definitely the most common, and then pores after that. Ridges are a little bit more rare. And the difference between gills and ridges is that you can remove the gills from the cap, so you could like pull them off one by one. The gills kind of have depth to them, you can kind of see up into them. The ridges are stuck onto the cap itself, if that makes sense. And we are going to see a mushroom which has ridges, and that is a very key identifying feature. And then I included this picture here. This is my picture of a species called smoky spindles. And the reason I included it is just to point out the fact that some mushrooms are not making this cap at all. They're doing something completely different. Probably this guy just has its spores on the outside of it, on these tiny little almost like hair things, and that's how it releases its spores. So, it's great to learn about mushrooms and the way that they often form, but there's always going to be weird things that they do because fungi are just weird. So, okay, ecology. This is very, very important to start thinking about how fungi fit into their, the world around them, their environment. So geology, different fungi, different soil types. That's the same as plants. We're going to see one later which particularly likes sandy soil, which I found to be kind of weird. Then seasonality, this is very, very key. So different fungi show up during different seasons. Some might pop up only for 1 week in the fall, and others might stick around all the way from fall all the way into winter. And when I say stick around, it could mean that a single growth stays for months, or it could mean that this same species grows multiple times, right? And this is the sort of thing that you get to know and understand if you spend a lot of time outdoors looking at fungi. So they're heterotrophs, so they need to eat something. They could eat from the soil. They can be saprotrophic, which means that they are eating dead things. This is very important ecologically, because if they weren't there to eat, for instance, fallen trees, the trees might just sit there until they fossilize, and then where would we be? We would just be on a planet covered with material that never, turns back into soil. So, parasitic, they could be parasitic on a number of things. We already talked about insects. They could be parasitic on plants. Symbiotic, so generally with plants, which we'll talk about in a second, but they could also be symbiotic with insects or something else. And then mycorrhizal, very important term in the fungi world. This is plant symbiosis between plants and fungi. So to give you an idea of the scope of this, 90% of plants on the earth have a symbiotic relationship with fungi. So this is very, very important for our planet. There's lots of studies showing that plants which are cut off from fungi and don't have a relationship with them are way less healthy. So you can see what's going on here. The plants are giving them carbohydrates, and the fungi are giving them water and mineral nutrients. So basically, as I said earlier, fungi are particularly good at absorbing nutrients. So they're a helpful thing to be in a symbiotic relationship with. And this is called the wood wide web by people increasingly. I wouldn't want to overstate the case, because I think people are getting really excited about this idea that like everything in the woods is talking to each other. Well, kind of. There's a lot of messaging going on, right? So probably trees talk to each other through their roots. We know this. But also fungi talk to trees. Fungi talk to each other. When I mean talk, I'm just saying they're sending electrical signals to each other. We can actually measure this and see what's going on with the patterns. And fungi have also been found to facilitate plants talking to each other. So plants could send signals to each other through fungi. So that's a pretty cool thing that's going on out in the world. These are terms that you'll hear if you get more into fungi. Not particularly important to memorize, but it's just two types of mycorrhizal. This one does not penetrate the cortical cells of plants, and this one does. Just because you hear people use these terms, I decided to mention them. And then I wanted to mention also that there is overlap between all of these different categories. I think when you first start out, you're like, okay, so it's sapotrophic. It only eats dying things. But a ton of them are both sapotrophic and parasitic. And there's even ones that are both mycorrhizal and sapotrophic or whatnot. And I also wanted to mention that plenty of the non-fruiting fungi do other things to eat. So there are actually carnivorous fungi. There are fungi which hunt nematodes. So this is going on on a microscopic level, but they are doing it. And there's ones which are horrible, they attack immune cells. And then there's ones that are endophytic, which just means they basically live within other organisms affecting nothing. So just wanted to mention all the different ways that they can kind of eat and do stuff. Okay, so moving on to beginner ID facts. Again, I know that this is like a barrage of information, but this is just to get people thinking. It's not something that you need to memorize. I don't have all these terms memorized, and I'm not going to go through all these terms. This is just for your reference. So basically what I would recommend is taking a really good reference guide like this one from Trip Sitters with you if you're looking at fungi. And if you're reading a description and it says the cap shape starts conical and then it turns ovate or something, you'll know what they're saying, right? And yeah, so when I say beginner, these are things I'm mentioning which I think you can understand and get a grasp on just from a basic look at a mushroom. You just look at it and you can start to figure these things out. So first of all, it's important to look at a fungi in situ, in its original habitat and situation. So if you pick a mushroom and you take it to a mycologist and you're like, what's this mushroom? They're gonna be like, where was it? What was it? What was its environment? Because they want to know, was it eating something dead? Was it parasitic? Was it mycorrhizal? Right? So they're trying to figure that out. That's an important way to classify them. Color can be useful, but it can also be kind of deceptive. So obviously it's a trait to keep in mind, but it can change over time, or there can be lots of variance. Underside, as I said, looking at the underside of the mushrooms is very important. And particularly, if it has gills, what color are the gills? Because it's often different than what's on the top. Guttation, this is not actually particularly common, but I mentioned it because it's super easy to spot. It's like the fungi is crying. So it puts out these droplets of liquid, usually of a color. And people think that the reason they do this is to get rid of excess liquid. I don't have a picture of this here, but you'll see a picture of this later. So I just thought this was it's a super easy thing to spot, basically. These are terms which refer to the consistency or the texture of the cap. Again, pretty obvious. All of these kind of refer to them being sort of slimy or wet. And this is soft and velvety. I think that's pretty obvious. I wanted to point out this term glabrous because this is also used in plant morphology, in plant identification. And so glabrous is referring to something being kind of hard and shiny. So if you've ever seen a magnolia leaf, the magnolias they have around me anyway, they kind of look like they're polished wood. So that's what glabrous means. We'll be seeing a glabrous cap later. But I just think that's a helpful term because it comes up a lot. Stalk versus sessile. So all of these have stalks, right? Stalk. But there are some fungi which do not have stalks. They just kind of stick out of something, and that is sessile. We already talked about the veils, right? And then I had to put this warning. Unfortunately, these are slippery creatures, so they can look very different depending on the conditions. The same species could look very, very different. Now, I do feel like when I say all this, I've had people get very disheartened because they're like, I'm never gonna learn this. This is too much information. This is too hard. You have to be some kind of expert to be able to do this. Well, yeah, it's hard, and that's why I emphasize this, but at the same time, there are fungi which are much easier, which have very, very clear distinguishing features which you can learn quickly. So all of the fungi I'm going to be talking about how to identify later are easy, in my opinion. They are very clear and easy. Okay, this is more advanced stuff, and this is stuff which you really need to take a little bit more time to figure out, but not all of it is hard to do. It just is not as easy as just taking a glance at the mushroom. So watch the development of the mushroom over time, right? So if you go walking every day in the same park and you see a mushroom, you can see what it does over the course of a week. It's going to change, most likely, unless it's one that stays around for a long time. Scientists often kind of measure these things, so they might measure how many centimeters there are between the gills or how deep the gills go. I've never done that myself, but that's something you see people do. This is something that's very simple, but obviously you have to know about it. Mushrooms often bruise different colors when they're touched. So you might see something say that it bruises black. Well, that just means like if you press your finger into it, it's gonna bruise. It's gonna change color. And also they could have a weird reaction when cut open. They could kind of ooze a liquid. We're gonna see a mushroom later that does that. There's chemical tests you can use. I've never done this, but these are all kind of advanced forms of identification. So spores are different colors. They're often different color even than the gills. So if you put a mushroom cap down on a piece of paper, you can see what the spore print color will be. You can look at the spores under a microscope to see what shape they are. And then you can go all the way to genetic sequencing to be 100% sure of the species. I don't have a genetic sequencing lab. I've never done this, obviously. So I'm not going to talk about this. This is just another way to describe the shape of things. But I do want to emphasize this part. So the way that the gills attach to the cap and stem, I wouldn't try to memorize these terms. I don't have these terms memorized, but it's important. It's a helpful distinguishing factor. So if you look at a mushroom and they have, the gills don't touch the stem, that's free, and that's a very distinguishing feature. We are later going to see a mushroom with decurrent ridges, actually. So the ridges run down the stem, and that is the number one key identifying feature of the species. So helpful. Okay, we've been going for a while. I know I've thrown a lot at you guys, so let's take a 5 or 10 minute break and you can tell me when you're ready to come back. So I wanted to do this little bit of a rundown of the common mushroom types I see. Now, especially where you are, Taz, this may not generalize. In my experience, there's a lot of commonality of species around the whole world, but there is some bit of a difference between the different hemispheres. So, particularly the northern and southern hemispheres. But I just wanted to put this together to kind of show the type of mushrooms that I tend to see. And this is not to have any kind of perfect memorization and identification of this stuff, because I'm not even talking about how to identify them. This is groups, right? So it's just kind of an introduction to the different groups that you might run into of mushrooms. So Amanita, this is the classic Mario mushroom, right? I feel like a lot of people have heard of the Amanita muscaria. So that is a kind of toxic mushroom that also is hallucinogenic. That's within this family. And so there are many different species in here. So again, there's some psychedelic, there's some that are deadly poisonous, and there's some that are edible. And they typically have kind of the classic mushroom cap and universal veil. Okay, boletes. So there are many choice edibles in this. There's a order of Boletus. But then there's a genus, and I think usually when people are talking about boletes, they're talking about the genus. Um, there are a number of choice edibles within boletes, but I tend to find them a little on the harder side to identify, so I didn't really include any in the foraging section. But you can usually tell it's a bolete when it has this gorgeous, spongy pores. Okay, so this one is called Old Man of the Woods. I've eaten it and it was not tasty. It tasted bad. These are polypores, so these are not necessarily related. This is just a term to refer to like the bracket or shelf fungi that just stick out of stuff. And so you can see they're all growing out of wood and they all have this kind of fan shape. We're going to talk about this one later. You can see this is what I meant by glabrous. It's kind of shiny and kind of hard. This is one of my favorites. It's the Dryad saddle. They get really big. I think they're cool. And then this is guttation. So this is the oak bracket. You can see it looks like it's kind of crying. It's got a bunch of liquid coming out of it. This is not super common, but it's a very clear feature, right? So this fella, the oak brackets that I would see stuck around for like months, and it would be doing this guttation every time I saw it. So very clear identifying feature. Okay, russulas. I just included these. This is a genus. They're related to the next one I'm going to show, so they're in the family Russulaceae. None of them are edible or anything. They were one of the first ones I learned to identify. I think that they're very, they're eye-catching, right? This bright red color. This one is the green one, or kind of bluish. There's just one I frequently see. They're in the same family as these milk caps. So this is the indigo and this is the golden. These have this very clear kind of circular design on them, but not all of them do. But one key feature of milk caps is if you cut into them, you just give them a little slice, even with your fingernail, they're going to produce what's called latex. It's not like latex, like normal latex, but it's like a milky, sticky substance. Doesn't sound very appealing, but I recently ate a milk cap for the first time and it was one of my favorite edibles I've ever tried. So do keep an eye out for this, but keep in mind you have to be careful with ID. I'll talk about that later. Puffballs, these are not a related group. This is a morphological group, so they're not actually related to each other genetically. They're lumped together because they have the same way that they handle spores, so they shoot spores out of the top of them. Okay. Cup. This is a family of mushrooms, and little guys. I like finding them. I'm just kind of introducing you to different ways that mushrooms can kind of pop up. Earth stars. I love to see earth stars. I think they're super cool. They also shoot their spores out the top. This is actually the same species here. They're just do weird stuff as they get older. They if it's dry, they turn this weird black leathery way, and if it's wet, they get like black and slimy. That's my experience with them. But this is a whole order of fungi, so there's probably tons of different ones. This is just the one that I see in my area. Nest fungi. This is a family, so they are related. These little fungi which grow up out of the ground, and they like wood chips. You can see in both of these pictures. Every time I found them, they've been with wood chips. This one is the fluted bird's nest, and you can see it's got like little eggs, which I find cool. And this one is called dung lover's nest fungi, so that's not a very appealing name, but okay, let's see. Coral fungi. Because nature likes to mess with us, these are not all related, which I find crazy. So they're grouped together because they take a similar form, but there are corals which are not related. I find these super, super cool and pretty. Jellies. They're a paraphyletic group, so basically they are related, but there are plenty of other species in their same kind of groups which are not jellies, so they're kind of more lumped together because of how they look. Just a cool thing to see. People like to see that this one's the woodier. It's kind of, especially if you live in a super damp, rainy area, you're probably going to see gooey, weird fungi popping up. Lichen. Okay, lichen takes a little bit more time to explain because I think people don't necessarily know this, but lichen are symbiotic organisms. So there are at least two, usually far more, organisms all living together to form a lichen. So it's going to be a fungi, probably an algae or cyanobacteria, and maybe yeasts. So they join together into clearly distinguishable forms. So they are like separate species that you can learn to identify, but they're made up of particular different organisms working together to join one thing. This one is called British soldier lichen, Christmas lichen, and bushy beard lichen. All the pictures I'm using here are mine. So these are all things that I have seen enough to be familiar with. Not actually fungi. So I just wanted to include some pictures of stuff that people might look at and think, oh, that's a mushroom, but it is not. The first two we have here are non-photosynthesizing parasitic plants. So the first one here is called they're sometimes called bear corn, or they're called American cancer root. So this is a parasitic plant that grows on the roots of other plants. They don't produce any of their own energy. They do not photosynthesize. They just sap off other things. Same thing here. This is the ghost pipes. I love them very much. They're pretty rare, but I always get excited to see them. These are actually parasitic on mycorrhizal fungi. So basically, they're leeching off fungi, which are living in conjunction with other plants. So that's kind of cool to think about. And then this last one here is a slime mold. This one's called a dog vomit slime mold. Not a very pleasant name. But people often think slime molds are fungi, but they are not. They are another eukaryotic organism. I'm not a slime mold expert, but you see slime molds a lot, and they look like fungi, but they're not. So, okay, I wanted to include this slide just to, again, kind of highlight some of the difficulties with fungi identification. So these first two pictures here, this is called the devil's urn. This is the same species, right? They look like they're something completely different. This is before rain, and this is after rain. So certain species can basically completely transform depending on their environment. This is kind of another example. What is going on here? Why is it growing like this? It was a weird thing to see. I almost guarantee that the species does not normally grow its spores up around the top. I have seen mushrooms growing kind of out of the dirt under a rock, and because of that, they like almost grew inside out. It's a little hard to explain. I wish I had a picture of it, but they can grow weird depending on their environment. This here, I know, is a golden phylliota, which I like, but it's a baby, right? So it's at an early stage of its development. And also, when you start to get to know a mushroom, a species, you might think, okay, I kind of know how this one does. I've seen it a number of times. So with this golden phylliota, I have usually seen them growing in huge clusters. So like, I don't know, 10 to 30 all together. But this guy was growing all by itself. Maybe other ones would come out to grow with it later, or maybe it just stayed alone. So there's always like weird exceptions to the norm. And I included this picture here because I wanted to highlight there are mushrooms that I don't even bother looking at or trying to identify. So mushroom people refer to little brown mushrooms and little white mushrooms. Just pretty indistinct, plain white brown mushrooms. They just don't have anything that really you can hook onto to identify. I just tend to kind of not even look at them. Okay, section that I made for Taz, yay, because Taz is from Africa, and I was also just interested in looking into what's going on with Africa, because typically when I'm looking into stuff, I see people saying, this mushroom is found in North America. This mushroom is found across the temperate northern hemisphere. And then the tropics or Africa, Australia, different regions are kind of separated out and treated like they're completely different. And so the more I looked into it, I was asking myself, is it true? Is Africa completely different than everywhere else? And I sort of came to the conclusion that yes, it is different, but also not as different as people make it out to be. So first of all, fairly understudied. I did read several very long research articles kind of surveying the fungi, but comparatively relatively understudied. There is more overlap than people say. So I kept seeing people say this mushroom doesn't grow in Africa or this mushroom only grows in the northern hemisphere. And then when I really looked into it, I found out that there were species that were specific to Africa, but from the same family, which did grow there. And then there's also the question of globalization. There are plenty of species from around the world which have been introduced to Africa. But it does make sense to kind of differentiate the tropics, that the tropics is the region of the Earth around the equator, from the rest, and it does make some sense to differentiate the southern hemisphere from the northern, just because it does appear that there's differences. So I included this map because it just shows the different regions. So we've got rainforest. You'd expect to see a pretty high percentage of fungi in the rainforest. This humid subtropical regions, I'd expect to see quite a number there. But even though, again, fungi are associated with moisture, there are fungi in deserts. So I found this really cool. Truffles, all known truffles in Africa, are desert species which grow underground. They're in mycorrhizal associations with desert plants. So I found that to be really cool. Something to think about. And then the next thing I found to be even cooler. So we went through different categories of how fungi grow earlier and how they eat. Well, there are termitophilic fungi in Africa. Now, I had kind of heard of this because I had heard of fungi species growing in conjunction with ants in Asia, but there are quite a number. This is something that's almost entirely unique to Africa, growing in symbiotic relationships with termites. So the family, or I think it actually is the genus, is Termitomyces. And typically what happens is the fungi kind of cultivate, the termites kind of cultivate them. So they get the fungi to grow out of their mounds by collecting material that the fungi want to eat. So they collect dead stuff, dead wood and dead leaf litter for the mushrooms to eat. The mushrooms grow and then they eat parts of them. They eat like combs or they eat their veils. So it's a good deal, right? The mushrooms don't have to do any work to get their food, and then the termites eat parts of them that they don't mind having eaten. And so this here is Termitomycetes titanicus. This is commonly harvested in Zambia and West Africa. And this is one of the largest, this is the largest edible mushroom in the world. So it is a termitophilic mushroom. I was like so psyched to learn about this, and I actually think in part I got my job that I'm starting in the fall because she asked me something cool I'd learned recently, and I had literally been researching this the night before, so I went on a whole rant about it. Okay, so Taz is in South Africa, so I did a little bit, it was a little bit hard too, but I did do some reading on South Africa. So the tip of Africa, going back to the picture, this humid subtropical region, is estimated to have 200,000 species of fungi. It's a lot of fungi. I was thinking about trying to research what goes on in coasts, because coastal regions, like coastal California as well, seem to have very high populations of fungi. Of course, that could just be from humidity. But I was also curious if like there's some sort of relationship with the ocean and like high levels of salt or salinity and fungi. But I wasn't actually able to find anything on that. I was just finding stuff about marine fungi. So, but I would kind of think about that if I was living near a coast. So recently, 2 new species of fungi, which were thought to not even occur in Africa, were found in South Africa. We're going to talk about both of these later. Hericium and Morchella. So the Hericium, which you can see a picture of here, what this is, was found in the I'm sorry, I don't know if I can say this, Kindsina forests, and then the Morchella was found in the Hangclip sand fynbos. So, thought that was cool. There are a lot of introduced species, though. Like when I was looking up South African foraging groups, they were pretty much all going for introduced invasive species. And boletes in particular, so we talked about boletes a little bit earlier, specifically the king bolete or porcini, which I have never foraged, but is my favorite like store-bought mushroom. I've eaten it in ravioli and it's really, really tasty. So, okay, that was the little Africa section. So I originally made this lecture for people in my area, which is the southeast of the United States. But the more that I looked into this, because I was like, should I update this section for a more general audience? The more I looked into it, the more I found that this does generalize. So maybe not the specific species that I see is found everywhere, but species that are related closely are usually found certainly across the whole northern hemisphere, if not around the entire world, the more I looked into it. So I do think that this kind of generalizes. But it is based on the mushrooms that I see and am familiar with. So, okay. First, we need to talk about ones that will kill you dead. And of course, there's more than just these, but these are the ones I tend to see. Okay, this is the funeral bells. Also, this is kind of just a good introduction to descriptions of mushrooms. They're pretty small little guys. You can see 1 centimeter to 7 centimeters. They're brown, orange, maybe yellowish. I don't know. I feel like they kind of get yellowish around the cap margin. The gills are pale tan to red brown. So they change color as they get older. Fairly crowded gills, so they're kind of close together. And they're broadly attached to the stem and might slightly run down it. They have long and fragile stems, so they're like really easy to break. And they have a ring which goes away as they get older. You can see little remnants of rings here. Again, ring can be called a nullus. And they're fibrillose, so that's referring to their like texture. You can see it kind of looks like they have little filaments on them. They are saprotrophic, so they're going to be eating dead material. I have only ever seen them on stumps or fallen trees. And they might prefer conifers to deciduous trees. If you don't know what the difference is, conifers are generally evergreen and they're cone-bearing, so like pines. And deciduous are the ones with the leaves that fall off. So you find them more on conifers than deciduous trees. Now, I have only ever found them in multiples, and I have only really seen them in the fall and the winter, but when I was looking into it, I was seeing sources saying that they grow in summer. This is found all across North America and also Europe. So, these are like kill you dead, like you will die. Do not eat. Also, the North American destroying angel. There are European variants, and kill you dead, like people die. Your organs will break down and you will be dead within 24 hours if you eat this guy. They can get pretty big. This is an amanita. I mentioned the amanitas earlier, right? So same family as the Amanita muscaria. They get pretty big. They have free gills, so you can kind of see that here. The gills don't touch the stem. Pretty close gills, like there's not much space in between the gills. Stalk is white. They have this big bulbous base. They've gotten a big old flaring annulus or ring, right? So here it is flaring out, and here it is as an older one. It's fallen down. It could just completely fall off the older it gets. So this one is mycorrhizal. It grows in association with oak and pine, and it's around for a long time, all the way from April into October. Maybe even later if you live somewhere warm. Okay, so now let's actually talk about foraging and identification. So when I did my plant lecture, I spent a much longer time talking about being eco-friendly if you're foraging. I don't emphasize that quite as much with fungi because, again, they don't generally mind being eaten too much. But it is obviously important to be safe, so I'm going to be talking about the safety a lot. I have seen many people be afraid of touching a mushroom. They think just touching it could kill you. That's never a problem. You don't have to worry about touching them. There is one species I'm going to mention where you don't want to snort the spores. It's just because it creates so many spores. It would not be good for you to do that. But otherwise, you don't have to worry about breathing in spores. You will be fine. You're breathing in spores all the time, actually, so. But one way to be respectful and nice to the mushrooms, if you pick one and you don't eat it, leave it with the cap facing down. It can still release its spores. So that's just a friendly, neighborly thing to do. And if you are going to eat it, you can bring a basket with you and leave the cap face down in the basket, and it will release its spores as you walk. You are helping it to reproduce. That's exactly what it was trying to do in the first place. So you're helping it out. Take your time to get to know a species. I mean, for me, I've been doing this for years, so I've really gotten to know certain species. The more you do that, the more you will be comfortable and sure. At this point, I just glance at something, I'm like, that's a bolete. Yeah, it's a bolete. So things like that, you just gotta take your time. There are certain species which are more difficult because they have lookalikes. I'm going to be talking only about things that I think are easy to identify and will not kill you. But as I mentioned earlier, there are certain ones that are just basically featureless and impossible to learn. Color is not the most reliable factor. If you really want to get into this, you need to understand what conditions a fungi is going to prefer. You don't go out looking for a spring mushroom in fall, you know. And mushrooms do tend to occur again and again in the same spots, so you can kind of go back to the same spot the next year if you saw one there last year. But you should be careful about environmental contaminants because they can suck those up. So if you're in a heavy industrial area where they're dumping toxic chemicals, maybe you don't want to eat things there. I think that's pretty clear. You might need to do some hardcore identification like spore prints to be 100% sure on certain things. Be careful. Don't just take one eye. Don't take your phone. I use Seek, for instance, for identification. But don't just use an app and it tells you it's this and just go, yep, that's it. You need to do your own research. You need to back things up and do double checks. Also cook mushrooms because you don't want to eat any of them raw, to be honest. Cooking also could save your life if you accidentally pick the wrong one. And again, when in doubt, throw it out. I mean, I have been tempted to eat things, but I don't eat them unless I know what they are. Okay, so with those things out of the way, let's talk about some of the best forages. Chanterelles. We love chanterelles. These are found globally. This was one where I was seeing people say, oh, they're only found in the northern hemisphere. And the more I looked into it, the more I found out they are found everywhere. So don't trust the internet. But they're going to be in forests because they're mycorrhizal. So they have to be growing in conjunction with trees. There are multiple edible species, so they don't just look like this. They could look different. They can be small and red. They can be smoother than this. But they're a choice edible. And personally, I can always tell when it's a chanterelle. I don't think they're that hard to identify for a particular reason, which I'll talk about in a second. They are found on the forest floor. They're not growing out of dead wood. They're connected to a root system, right? So they're mycorrhizal. This gold species here prefers conifers. They can grow kind of together, but they're not going to be growing in this huge patch of like 5 to 15 all growing out of the same stem or like root, which you will see with a common lookalike, which is the jack-o'-lanterns. Well, come back now. You see them in the summer. I recently ate a whole bunch, and I was very happy about it because they tasted good. So we're in peak season for them right at this moment, or at least we are here in the northern hemisphere. You're gonna see them 3 to 4 days after heavy rain. I wouldn't necessarily trust the shape or the color. I just wrote the general description. Spore print, definitely helpful if you want to be 100% sure. But I think once you've got this, you have the chanterelle. Nothing else has wavy decurrent ridges, right? So ridges, not gills. Remember, they cannot be pulled off the cap. If you can see here, they are stuck onto the cap. They're not deep, they're ridges. And they are decurrent, which means as you can see here, they are running down the stem. Okay? So I think that fact makes them a beginner. That actually was the first mushroom I ever foraged. So, okay, lion's mane. Nothing else. You're not going to get lion's mane confused with anything else. These are my pictures. This was over the course of about 10 days, the growth of a lion's mane out of a dead tree. Or maybe it was alive, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't even know that I feel the need to describe this. If you can just look at it, you can tell what it is. These are found all over the world. They prefer the hardwood trees. They can be both saprotropic and parasitic. You find them in the fall and the winter. They like cold or cool rain, and damp and rainy weather. I've been out walking and seen a whole bunch of them in the rain. They're anything that looks like this, that has sort of white, like I showed you the picture of the African species that was related here. Anything that looks like this is in this family and is safe to eat. They're not going to kill you. And they're also highly medicinal. So, increasingly these are being sold at health food shops as like powders. I personally also just like eating them. I find that they're good for digestion, but the number one thing that they're used for is cognition. So this is the mushroom that has been shown to be really good for brain health. So eat it, buy it, use it if you want to use it. I think they're great. They're awesome. So, okay, cauliflower mushroom. This is a family. This is one I found absolutely no evidence is in Africa. It seems like it's just in North America. And honestly, it's actually kind of rare in the first place. And pretty much every time I've seen it, it's already being eaten by bugs. So I've never actually tried it, but I decided to include it because, again, what are you going to mix up with this? Nothing. Like, nothing else looks like this. It's a very easy mushroom to identify. It's nutritious and it's medicinal. It is grows on tree roots, so it kind of might look like it's growing out of the ground, but it's like it is growing out of a root. And I usually see them in late summer, early fall. It's like always horrible and hot and humid when I see them. Okay, morels. This is probably one of the most popular foraging mushrooms. I've actually never tried one. I've never actually found them, but I think that for one thing, there aren't really dangerous lookalikes, and for another, if you can see these identifying features, you know for sure you have a morchella. And again, new species of these found in South Africa, native species recently. So they got this kind of comb. They're hollow on the inside. They have a white stem. If you see that, it's a morel. Like, it's nothing to worry about mixing this up with. Now they are mostly found in the northern hemisphere. They're mycorrhizal or saprotrophic, so they can be both. They occur in the spring. They are popping up earlier and earlier into the winter now as it's getting warmer. And this is one where it's good to know your trees. So if you know what a tulip poplar or a persimmon or a sycamore looks like, they grow in conjunction with those. I definitely know tulip poplar and persimmon. I'm not sure if I know sycamore. Anyway. You can find them kind of running like along like river banks or like stream banks. And if you're harvesting it, you can just leave the base in the soil so it can grow. And again, I really don't think you need to worry about mixing it up with anything. Okay, turkey tail, one of the most popular medicinal mushrooms. This one is one of the ones studied for its anti-cancer effects. So very powerful anti-cancer mushroom. It is found everywhere, all continents but Antarctica. It's saprotrophic. I usually see it. I honestly feel like I see it mostly in the fall and winter, but you can find it pretty much all year. It's a polypore or a bracket. So I don't know if you can see this, but basically the upper surface has these kind of rings on it, and the rings don't bleed into each other. So that's a key feature. You can see each one distinctly. And the color on this one is not reliable. It can look very different, depending. But it has a kind of a hairy or velvety texture. So you should be able to see the pores with your eyes. Well, sorry. You should be able to see the pores on the bottom. And there's supposed to be about 3 per millimeter. Now, it does have lookalikes, which may not be medicinal. There's actually many, many, many species in the Trametes family. So this versicolor is the most prized medicinal one, but other ones are also medicinal, or at least not going to kill you. They're safe to eat. But yeah, normally people don't like fry these up or something. They like dry them and turn them into a powder or a tea. Okay, giant puffball. I have only seen this guy once, but they're pretty common. They're so popular in parts of Europe that they actually almost like messed with the population amount, which is crazy because they're one of the most successful species in the world. But basically, puffballs, again, they shoot out their spores from the top, and they do billions. Billions. They produce billions of spores. And you could confuse them with earth balls from the look. I mean, I kind of don't think you could, but I guess that's a lookalike, kind of. But the earth balls are not pure white inside. This was a picture posted by Forager Chef. He said this is like the pristine, perfect version. He would still eat this one. He would just remove the bug-eaten parts, and he said this is when it's not good to eat anymore, if it looks like this. And you definitely don't want to eat it once it started producing spores. So, but you find it just kind of growing out of the ground, which I've seen before. Okay? It doesn't have any stalk, so it's sessile. It can be really, really big. Like really, really, really big. Okay. And then this is not in the same family. You can see they have different genus names, so they're not related, but this is another puffball. I see these every year. I see them all the time. So this is a very, very common one. It grows all over the world. It likes to eat dying, dead stuff. I've sometimes seen it growing out of the ground. I've often seen it growing on logs. Again, you don't want to eat it once it starts producing spores, so it should be pale white inside. And if you ever see these, so they produce these kind of green-brown spores. They produce a lot of spores. Like, it is so thick that you will just see it in the air if you touch them. So don't stick your nose right into the spores and breathe it in. I don't think anybody would actually do that, but it's supposed to be really bad for you to do that, so just don't do it. Yeah, so they basically, this is when they're good to eat, when they look like this on the inside, but eventually they'll start doing spores and look different. And I see them all fall and winter. I've seen them producing spores into January. So basically they start growing sometime in September, October, and then probably by November they're no longer good to eat. And then they just stick around forever. Hen of the woods, or maitake. This is a very, very prized mushroom. I think I've only actually seen it a couple times, but this is found all around the northern hemisphere. It likes to grow at the base of trees. It prefers oak trees. It's found from September to December. It has some other lookalikes, but it can be distinguished because it's dark gray, smoky brown, or creamy. It has rosettes. You can kind of see that here. And they all come out of a central stem. They have soft flesh, which you can easily tear or bend. And they're kind of gross when they get wet, like gooey. They have a white spore print, which you can often see. So they produce so many spores, you can like see them on the top of the caps. And then they bruise brown when touched. Chicken of the woods, this is one of my favorites I've ever eaten. They're highly nutritious, very, very high in protein. This is mostly found in North America and Europe, but I have seen reports of it showing up elsewhere. It is both sapotrophic and parasitic. It likes oaks. and it's found from late spring to early fall after rain. It's pretty stiff, so like unlike the hen of the woods, that you could just like easily bend it. These are like harder, tougher. And there's actually a lot of different species, so they can kind of look different, but I think they're pretty easy to distinguish because of the, like, they have the little yellow pores on the bottom, they have a white spore print, they grow in shelves, they have white flesh, and they're around for a while. I think I was still seeing, like, the kind of skeletal remains of the one I ate, because I didn't take the whole thing. I was still seeing that, like, months and months later, so. Okay, and this is the last one, so we're almost done here. This is the reishi mushroom, highly prized medicinal mushroom in Asia, particularly Japan and China. China is like the mushroom capital of the world. They eat tons of mushrooms there and are very into medicinal mushrooms. I have seen it quite a number of times here in America. It's also found in Africa. So it's glabrous, nice and shiny. That's always a feature of it. It's a saprotrophic, so it's eating dead stuff, and it's a polypore. It likes deciduous wood, so again, trees where the leaves fall off, and it really likes especially maples. It could grow right out of the side of the tree, or it could grow out of the roots. It's very hard. It is a hard, tough mushroom. The color can kind of look different, and usually you're gonna see darker color here at the root stem, around the stem, and then it gets lighter as you go out. It's usually sessile, but it could have a little bit of a stalk. I thought this was interesting. It can grow differently based on the oxygen level. So the more oxygen there is, they're gonna have this classic conch shape, and then it said antlers emerge when there's more carbon dioxide. So this is kind of what the antler looks like here. And the pores you can barely see with the naked eye. They're white, and it has a brown spore print. So I don't think you're really gonna mix this up with anything. There's a lot of different species as well. So it's not just one species, but they're all medicinal. And nobody eats these. Maybe you grind them up and turn it into a powder. I have heard of people putting it in like highly concentrated alcohol to draw out the medicinal qualities. But yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much the end. Resources, I highly recommend checking out iNaturalist and get the app Seek on your phone. Seek is good for everything. And you need to double check your information when you use Seek, but like it's a really good resource for getting started on species identification. I do double check with picture mushrooms. So for instance, when I ate that weeping milk cap recently, I certainly did about 15 minutes of research before I ate that thing. This is a database you can use to look things up. This PowerPoint itself has resources, and there's resources kind of, because I linked to a bunch of stuff all throughout. So yeah, I will make this available. And thank you everybody for joining. It was very fun.